Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the greatest games on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me is Jonathan Wilson. And with us today is Faye Carruthers, presenter and reporter for Sky Sports, TalkSport, IMG, and many more. Faye, pleasure to have you on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a cup final for you today. More specifically, the 1988 League Cup final that finished Luton Town 3, Arsenal 2. Faye, why have you chosen this game?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe because it's the greatest moment in Luton's history.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that you're a Luton Town fan picking that game. Or an Andy Dibble fan, perhaps. More on him later. Well, the final, it's regarded as one of the most exciting in the competition's history. And Jonathan, looking back on the highlights, I mean, we get into the game, but it's a fair claim.
Yes, I mean, I watched it live, and I'd have been 11 at the time, and I think so. The more I think about it, the more I think I was very fortunate to my sort of footballing. The first time I was really watching finals was that glorious period in the mid-80s when you had Coventry beating Tottenham 3-2 in the FA Cup final in '87, and you had Arsenal beating Liverpool in the League Cup final that year. Then this game, and you had all these great finals of the late '80s. But I have to say, I hadn't watched it back since '88, and I'd sort of forgotten just how compressed all the action is. Everything is the last 20 minutes, and it is one of the most remarkable sort of halves of a half of football you'll ever see.
Mm. And Faye, obviously now Luton are not a top flight side. They haven't been for many, many years. And this remains their only major silverware that they've ever won. It was a very different...
Are you not counting the Johnson's Paint Trophy?
Well, I don't make the rules.
I know what you mean.
Marcus, I mean, this will go out after we know the result, but it may be that the Football League trophy becomes very, very important for Sunderland within a few very short weeks. It may be. I agree with you, and it's not relevant at all. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, that's very, very good to point that out. Very, very clever to point that out, Jonathan. But yeah, I mean, this is in the '80s. Luton Town are a very different sort of entity, if you like, than what they are nowadays. Younger listeners will think, well, Luton Town winning a major trophy, top flight side, but it was very different back in those days, Faye. And I'm sorry to
No, it's fine. It's what makes my club, to be honest. Everything that we went through, and I'll be completely honest. I was 9 when this final was. I kind of don't care saying my age anymore, even though that completely gives it away. But yeah, 9 years old, and I wasn't really into football particularly. My best friend at school, Gary, he was a mascot for Luton Town. My friend Lynn liked Luton and Arsenal, but it wasn't really a big thing because don't forget, the early to mid '80s was all hooliganism, and what had happened in '85 at Kenilworth Road with Millwall. My dad very much was, you don't go to Luton. I went in the '90s and sang carols on the plastic pitch, but that was probably the first time I really had any kind of excitement about Luton in particular. So I don't really remember a lot about the buzz around this final, and I rang my uncle to have a chat with him. In fact, I rang my parents and they don't remember watching it, which is hilarious because they come to games with me now, and they used to go and sit in the old Oak Road end at Luton in the 70s. But my uncle remembers watching it at home in Luton and the buzz that was around it, and he talks about the roar when that winner from Brian Steen goes in, and my aunt was in the garden. She wasn't interested in watching it. She kind of came in going, what's going on, what's happened, because everybody around in the road had just erupted when that goal went in the 90th minute. So I'm really sad as a massive Luton fan. I'm really sad that as a 9-year-old I was not aware of this amazing thing going on 30 miles away from where I lived.
Yeah, at least you have a memory, because some people, of course, some Luton Town fans, they won't have that. They're either too young or they've come along a little bit later in the day. So, but I take the point you say. But it's interesting you say about the violence. You talked about Kenilworth Road, because they're in an earlier round they beat Coventry City 3-1 at a neutral venue, which was because Luton banned away fans from their home due to that violence. Jonathan, the 80s, it was a very different footballing landscape.
Yeah, it was. I mean, 84-5, I guess, was the real, in terms of domestic violence in English football, was the real peak of it. So there was the Luton Millwall game in 84-5. There there was also the 2 games in the League Cup semi between Chelsea and Sunderland. I remember the first leg of that, which was at Sunderland, was the first time I'd really sort of seen the effects of hooliganism. I remember going to school the next day, and I went to school, a mile from Roker Park, and seeing all the broken glass and blood stains on the ground, and kind of for an 8-year-old that was pretty shocking. And then the away game was horrific. I mean, Sunderland won it 3-2, and if you look at the footage, I think it's the second goal that Sunderland scored. There's a police horse in the box while the goal is scored, which arguably the goal shouldn't have stood. But I think by then it was just get the thing over with. And there's horses charging fans and awful stories about Sunderland fans leaving the ground, and sort of streets being blocked, and sort of the buses that Sunderland fans were on, the emergency doors being wrenched open, and people being dragged off and beaten up and having their faces slit. It was, I mean, it seems incredible now that football was still a thing I went to, and my parents weren't sort of saying no. But I mean, Luton took stronger action against that than the majority of clubs, that they banned away fans. Was it David Evans, the
David
chairman?
Evans, the chairman, yeah.
Who was he a Conservative MP?
For Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield, I think it was, yeah.
And I mean, I remember I say much later, I mean, maybe only 3 or 4 years later, but when you're that age, it feels like a lot later, that, as a Sunderland fan who went to away games, getting into Luton was kind of, that was one of the great... Yeah, if you can manage that. I never did it till it was legal, just to be clear, but I know a lot of people who did. So there was that game. The second round game against Coventry was played on neutral ground for that reason.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible when you sort of paint that picture, as I say, that how different it was. Faye, what do you remember about this? Luton, their run to the final. They beat Wigan, Coventry, Ipswich, Bradford, and Oxford in the semi-finals. Even though you were 9 years old, do you remember the excitement building around the campaign?
Genuinely not. No, not at all. Because again, for all those reasons I've said, it just wasn't. Football wasn't on my radar then at that age. We played in the back garden. By the time I was probably 11, I mean, I did play. I played with the boys. Gary, my friend who I mentioned, had a football party, and I remember playing, being the only girl playing there at Lee Manor Recreation Ground. I've told this story before. His mum, who sadly passed away last year, still had a video. Apparently, we don't have no idea where it is, of me hacking all the boys to bits in this 5-a-side football party that you used to have back in the 80s. But no, it just wasn't on my radar. As I say, I remember afterwards, I remember in Match magazine there was a trophy celebration photograph, and I remember that very much, but nothing else at all. And actually, while I was watching the football back, the footage back, seeing Kingsley Black, who I now class as someone I know, if you say, I wouldn't go as far as to say he's my friend, but he's someone that I chat to. Yeah, an acquaintance, which is crazy. He's like 19 years old, giving his pre-match interview to Jim Rosenthal, who I also now work with. It's like so surreal that I was 9 years old and that was happening, and these are 2 people that I now know. It's really, really bizarre.
I mean, David Pleat talks to the commentary about how Kingsley Black seems to be sort of coping with the pressure of the occasion very well. But Pleat had obviously known him. Did Pleat even give him his debut, maybe? But Pleat obviously knew him from as a youth coming through at Luton.
Yeah, but he'd said he didn't think that he had it. He said he thought he was too shy and didn't have enough about him to make it. But I think Pleat might have brought him on, but John Moore gave him his chance when Pleat had left. So, yeah, and then look what a player he turned out to be, and then went to Forest and had a great career.
Well, it's actually, if you look at the team, it's actually a remarkably good team that you've got. Mel Donaghy, who played at the '82 World Cup and went on to play for Manchester United. Tim Breaker, who played for West Ham a lot as well. Sort of one of those classic sort of old school right backs. Ricky Hill, who won 3 caps, I think, for England. Very tidy central midfielder. David Priest, who was one of those players. I mean, he's quite. I was sort of surprised to see him with hair. So my memory of him was this kind of this balding player who always played well against Sunderland. I wonder why we can't. We're sure we could get him for like 200,000. We should get him. And he probably wasn't actually any good against anybody other than Sunderland, but he always seemed to play well against us.
No, he was. Believe me, he was very good. He was
right.
very
Okay.
good.
Danny Wilson, who again just looks so young in this kind of, because I guess we know him as a manager now and all the stresses that's kind of, and it is 30 odd years ago. So
yeah, and Ray Harford, the manager, Faye, a Luton legend, it's fair to say, of course, sadly died. The turn of the century. What does he mean to the Luton Town fans?
Well, everything. A manager that brings silverware to a club is revered. Mm-hmm. And he hadn't been. I think he'd been at Fulham before he was with us, and then he'd been assistant, and then when John Moore left, took over, and that was his first Wembley final. No, I lie. It wasn't his first Wembley final. It was his first major final, because we had actually made it to Wembley 4 times that season, which was crazy. Just feels surreal. I didn't even know what the Synod Cup was. I'd never heard of that. When they were talking, I was like, what's that? Random one. But yeah, and obviously we'd got to the semi-finals of the FA Cup and lost to Wimbledon. So he'd had an amazing season. So yeah, he's definitely. I'm unfortunately, sad to say, I never got to meet him. But goes down in Luton Town history.
Yeah, I'm sure with a club, Luton it's not a city, hence the town on the end of
We've
the
tried.
Yeah, I'm sure. But for a club that size and for the town and all, it must have been so exciting for so many of those fans getting to finals or latter stages of tournaments, and someone like Ray Harford seemed to me. I'm trying to think of an equivalent. I suppose Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool, or somebody who's he's captured the imagination of the town, and everyone's like really for him and backs him, and I that's my sort of, when I think of Ray Harford, I think that's the kind of dynamic, I suppose, or the for want of a better word, the vibe that he created there. Yeah,
I know exactly what you mean, and actually, the person that then took that mantle on is Mick Harford, unrelated, but just played in this game that. You could argue our game turned when Mick Harford had to come off injured, which is very rare to see Mick Harford injured. And then what he's gone on and done with Luton over the years, it's incredible. And the fact that there were 95,000 people inside Wembley, that's just insane. I don't want to bring up the Johnson's Paint Trophy again, but I was there for that.
Please do.
And that was just that was incredible. Knowing, that was incredible for many reasons. And actually, I probably could have selected that game because I took my whole family to that game, and it was amazing. And it was when we were just about to go out of the Football League. It was so poignant for so many reasons. But just to be inside Wembley as a fan of your club representing there's nothing better than that.
Absolutely. Well, let's have a quick break and then we'll talk about the match itself. See you in a moment, everybody. Welcome back to the Greatest Games on the Blizzard. Right then, so we've set the scene already. Wembley. It was a beautiful sunny day as well, Jonathan, which is what we want. Every cup final should be a sunny day. And we haven't really mentioned them, but they were playing Arsenal, who were the holders of the League Cup. And of course, the next season, Arsenal would go on to win the league. And you mentioned Luton Town had a few good players. Well, Arsenal had some decent ones as well.
Yeah, this is very much Arsenal on the rise under George Graham. The previous season, Arsenal had finished 4th and Luton had been 7th. This season, they ended up 6th and 9th, respectively. So I was struck in the commentary, actually, by how they kept going on about what a major shock it was. And I guess it is because of the stature of the clubs, and certainly from a perspective now, it looks like an enormous shock. But actually, it was 9th beat 6th.
I think the shock element came from the fact that Luton were absolutely decimated by injuries, and we'd had a real blip in the season. We'd been doing really well, and then we had David Priest had barely played. Ricky Hill had just come back from a broken leg, like 4 or 5 months earlier. Les Seeley, of course, deemed literally the day before that he couldn't play. Andy Dibble had played in that semi-final defeat to Wimbledon, and so we weren't at full strength. Mark Steiner then had a strop because he wasn't on the starting sheet. We had all this drama going around beforehand, and actually, if you listen to the narrative of that ITV coverage, it's very much we're the underdogs, and I think that's where it comes, little plucky Luton, all those kind of adjectives that make me bristle. There's no disrespect to Brian Moore, by the way, who is a superb commentator, but at the same time, it's like I don't like that. We were a big team in our own right in the 80s. And,
yeah, I mean, you've been, for people who don't know, you'd been promoted in 83 and you've been sort of regularly mid-table and above really since then.
Yeah,
partly because of the plastic pitch, maybe, but
yeah, well, look, that's what others would say. I personally wouldn't say that.
But you won this one on grass, so well done.
Exactly.
Yeah, it played to our strengths, and thank God we did win a game on grass, so we could turn. And actually, if you look at the results that season, because I know Kenny Dalglish in particular was quite critical of the plastic pitch, but actually we went and got a draw up at Anfield against them. So I think we'd pretty much shown that we could play elsewhere, but yeah, people didn't like playing on that pitch.
So, the thing I was going to say about this, this being sort of portrayed as a major shock, because you see exactly the same thing with Wimbledon in the FA Cup final in '88. They finished 7th that season. Yeah. And so, I mean, I remember my dad kind of going on a massive rant about when Wimbledon won the FA Cup, and is this the greatest shock ever? And my dad was going, Sunderland was 6th bottom of the second division, so 5 months before they won the FA Cup in '73. This is a team that's finished 7th in the top flight, and again, when I sort of look back at that sort of very formative period for me of watching football, and you had Norwich in '85 won the League Cup, you had Oxford in '86, you had '87, Arsenal shocking Liverpool, and the League Cup finals around that time did seem to produce these. It was an opportunity for the non-giants to have their success. And
what would be determined as the big six nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, in those days,
in
those days, we sort of recognised the big five, didn't we? Which would be Everton, Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal, Tottenham. Would be seen as the big five, just in terms of.
That's 6.
Sorry,
I think that's 6.
Arsenal, Tottenham, Liverpool, Everton, Manchester United. That's 5.
Oh, I can't count.
You assumed Manchester City were in there, but it was before their
Maybe
time.
I did. Maybe I heard Manchester and automatically thought City.
League Cup success, and you thought Manchester City have got to be mentioned. But
and obviously that becomes hugely important when it comes to negotiating the breakaway in the Premier League and everything. But yeah, this period of late 80s, it was a time when other clubs could compete, and that was one of the joys of it.
It's interesting you say that about the breakaway league, because David Evans was quite outspoken, as he tended to be, about that, because there was talk of a breakaway league in the early 80s anyway, this kind of super league, if you like, and Luton were not in that conversation, and he was quite angry about that. And as it is, we ended up being relegated the season before it became the Premier League. But, perhaps we would be talked about in different terms had we been in the first year of what is now the Premier League. Because people tend to forget about football pre-1992, which again is something that infuriates the hell out of me.
Interesting. You mentioned the plastic pitch that Luton had earlier. Ray Harford, apparently he found his team selection very, very difficult ahead of the final. And I'm sure a lot of managers, even Alex Ferguson, would often talk about that. And he chose his team with their away form in mind because the players were playing on grass, which is a very rare consideration, of course, Faye, but it was a fair consideration considering they were playing their home games on fake grass.
I didn't know that. That's new information to me. I love that. Makes sense. Yeah. Makes total sense.
Well, it does, Jonathan, because it is, as we said earlier, people were kind of getting a bit annoyed about playing on.
Well, it's also it's not like fake pitches now, which are not far removed from grass.
Yeah,
they it was just like a sheet of plastic. It was.
Yeah, I was generous saying it was fake grass. Yeah, it was very much a plastic.
There was
they were
no
being
sort of
innovative.
Yeah, I mean, in some senses it makes sense because it's which is going to produce a better football, a sheet of plastic or thick mud. Ideally, you want somewhere in between, but. We've all seen pictures from the 80s, what they were like. Mm-hmm. So in terms of reducing costs, creating a sort of regular playing surface, it does make some kind of sense. But then you look at some of those games, and I think Oldham seemed to have a particularly bad one. But the huge bounces you got, it was and even the way you were able to tackle and things was so different on grass to plastic that everything was different.
Yeah. So we get to the final and the match itself, and the crucial injury in terms of how the game would pan out was Les Seeley not being fit. You mentioned this. Andy Dibble got the call. I think it was only his 6th appearance of the season, something like that.
It was.
And no one could have predicted the I mean, to submit, I was only coming up 6 years old for this game, and I actually don't remember this. It was sort of Italia 90 was really where I came in for football. And I'd known Andy Dibble, because a bit of a journeyman, played here, there and everywhere. But I mean, I had no idea that he had this particular afternoon at Wembley. We'll get onto him in a minute. But early on in the game, Thomas for Arsenal sort of runs through, and Dibble comes herring out and nearly fouls him. And I mean, nowadays, I think Thomas would have found a way to get contact and would have gone down. And Dibble could have been off the pitch. It could have been a very, very different game, of course. But you know, Jonathan, again, looking at Arsenal with their side. I mean, in the midfield, Rocastle, Thomas, Davis, Richardson up front, Smith and Groves. You know, you would expect them to be on the front foot in a cup final.
Yeah, I mean, the two players who stand out in that team for not quite fitting are, well, first of all, Nigel Winterburn, because he's playing on the wrong side. He's playing at right back, which I have to say, I hadn't really sort of remembered that he did that, because Kenny Sansom was at left back and he played right back, and actually ends up taking his penalty right-footed, which surprised me. I don't know if he actually was right-footed now. But anyway, he's sort of playing on the wrong side. And then Gus Caesar, who, of course... becomes this
was awful.
Well,
sorry.
I was trying to be kind, because he becomes this sort of joke figure for Arsenal fans. There's that great bit in Fever Pitch when Nick Hornby says, Gus Caesar, when he was at primary school, he must have been the best player in the school. When he was at senior school, he must have been the best player in the school. When he went to his first under 14s, under 15s, under 16s game, he must always have been the best player in the team. He makes it as a professional, and yet he's clearly nowhere near as good as anybody else on that pitch. And you sort of think, what a weird place that must be for him, to sort of be so much through his youth career to have kind of been, and it's obviously is true of lots and lots of players, to have been way better than anybody else they knew, and then suddenly to kind of find themselves, adrift. You're clearly nowhere near as good as anybody else they're playing with, and of course he doesn't last very long, and Steve Bold comes in and replaces him.
But he was only playing because David O'Leary was injured, and David O'Leary was kind of at the end of his Arsenal career anyway. But to then have to go on and replace a player like David O'Leary in a final, and you have that kind of shocker. No wonder his career. I think he ended his career in Hong Kong. I was reading. I love doing a little Google. Where are they now? Ended it in Hong Kong. It's quite sad, really.
Yeah. No, he's one of those players I kind of always feel slightly guilty about criticising, because I know how badly it went for him. But he has a terrible game. There's no two ways about it.
Well, I'm quite happy he did, so it's fine.
Well, I mean, as we'll go on and talk about it, I mean, his teammates should have seen off the final for him, so you wouldn't have to talk about him. But the first goal comes after 13 minutes, and it put Luton Town 1-0 up, and it was a goal from Brian Steen, and what a start for Luton, Faye it was.
Oh, it was a cracking start, and actually we'd played the better football in the opening stages anyway, and it had kind of come from, like, if you think of the passage of play, Mick Harford had a header from a free kick that had beaten John Lukic, but it just went over, and it just gave them a little bit of a boost. And then the Arsenal defence were then like, right, we need to keep an eye on Harford. So they actually man-marked him, 3 of them.
Yeah.
Which was how Luton's goal came about, because they'd broken earlier on 4-on-3. Arsenal had defended that well, but then the free kick came from the left-hand side. Ball comes in, 3 players surrounding Mick Harford, prevent him, fine. But Steve Foster, this is what my uncle always remembers. He's like, that Steve Foster touch. Like, he does not make deft touches like that. He's not renowned for that. And I'm like, no, of course he's not. And that touch is just beautiful. And again, Gus Caesar just does not see Brian Steen coming in behind him completely undetected. And then that finish into the back of the net was just beautiful, and we're ahead.
Yeah.
And great for Steve Foster as well, because obviously when he'd been at Brighton, had missed the 83 Cup Final through suspension, and lo, he returned for the replay. Brighton's chances in that first game. And so for him to not just be involved, but to play such a sort of key role in the opening goal, to sort of, because he ends up with he's sort of on the edge of the box with his back to goal, and someone just sort of flicks it with the outside of his right foot into the path of Steen. So it's a remarkable touch. And when I was sort of watching thing, does he know where Steen is, or is he just putting it in the area?
Yeah.
But I can't work out why he would play it with the outside of his right foot unless he was aiming it there, because the natural thing to do would be to turn and hit with his left foot. If he's just hooking it back in the danger area, because he has time, because he's, as you say, the three players have gone for the ball, so they're all sort of recovering. He does have time, but he flicks it with the outside of his right foot straight away, and then Steen with a very, very calm, angled side foot finish.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, it is a lovely goal. I'm glad you said that about Foster, because I was thinking that, because I thought that must have been one of the midfield players, and then you look and go, no, that is an English centre half from the 80s doing something like that.
A proper hard one as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Mick Harford was hard as well. I mean, there's a few hard players in that team.
Still is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sort of, obviously there was a whole first half to play. I'm sort of desperate to sort of get on to that second half, but unless I'm missing anything, Jonathan, there wasn't too many sort of big moments from that first half, really.
No, I mean, everything is Constantine in the final 20 minutes after that first goal. I mean, I think it was still a perfectly kind of decent game. There's still opportunities, and I think Arsenal, as would happen when they've gone behind, they slowly start to assert themselves. And I think particularly after half time, that becomes true, and it becomes much more about Arsenal attacking and Luton resisting.
Yeah. Luton were definitely in control of the first half for sure, and Andy Dibble had made a couple of decent saves as well. Foster, after that moment of brilliance, actually towards the end of the first half, had almost put Andy Dibble in real trouble, because Alan Smith was lurking, and he gave a bit of a hospital back pass at one point, and had Alan Smith been a tiny bit further up the pitch, then that could have spelled trouble. But we got away with it.
Yeah, into the second half. It could have been 2-0 Luton. Steen has a great header, or a header rather, and John Lukic makes an unbelievable save, Jonathan. Remember, he was a good goalkeeper, but it's a superb save, and it shows you again the back and forth nature. One can sort of think this was a smash and grab job from Luton, which, again, if you sort of just look at the scores, whatever, you might be tempted to think that, but Luton had their efforts. Oh,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a smash and grab in the sense of the last 20 minutes are a bit of a smash and grab.
But anyone was going to smash and grab it, I suppose you could sort of.
But no, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Luton had their chance, and that, as you say, it's a remarkable save. It's a save that deserves to be remembered, and it's sort of forgotten because of what follows.
Yeah, and then sort of what follows is Andy Dibble really coming to his own. We see this with an Alan Smith header, which Dibble saves very well. It seems like, in particular with headers, Andy Dibble's just not going to get beaten by a header on that day, Faye. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, he was offside in the end, Alan Smith, and I think he was probably a little bit relieved with that, because he should have scored it.
Yeah, he should have done.
It's they were getting a bit of confidence once Martin Hayes came on for Perry Groves, and Perry speaks about this quite openly. He always laughs with me about his performance in that final. He knows he didn't really show up, and Martin Hayes came on with about half an hour left to play, and just made it shifted Rocastle further to the right and gave Arsenal a bit of width again, and they started causing Luton loads of problems, getting a bit of confidence as well. And then Mick Harford got injured, and that was just brutal for Luton, because obviously his height, his presence, everything, he's able to frighten the Arsenal defence a little bit and be everywhere and be a real pest. And him coming off was really tough. Mark Steen, though, made like an instant impact, but you felt as if the Arsenal goal was imminent, which it was.
Yeah, and on 71 minutes, the goal did come from the sub Martin Hayes, Jonathan, and I mean, a scrappy goal, it's fair to say.
Yeah, so it's a free kick sort of right in the middle of the half. And I can't work out for the life of me why they take it short. I don't know what they gained by doing that, but they take it short. Paul Davis just sort of chips it into the box. It bobbles about. Alan Smith has a shot which is blocked, and then it comes to Martin Hayes, who forces it over line. So I don't know why they did that, but it worked. And yeah, it would be a horrible goal to concede, because Arsenal haven't done anything special there. They put the ball in the box and they've got the bounce, and
just went under a load of bodies, didn't it?
Yeah.
But you could see the relief with the Arsenal players when that goal goes in. They're thinking, finally, we're back in this game. And it must be such a crushing blow for Luton Town fans. You think, there was signs that maybe. I mean, I suppose the idea of holding out with still 20 minutes to go might be a little bit.
You're falling into that underdog, plucky little Luton narrative, Marcus.
Forgive me. But what I mean is, in the spirit of being 1-0 up and the opposition coming for you. Yeah, so I don't want.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. But yeah, I think it's. We were the masters of our own downfall with that second goal, though, because they had a load of confidence, and actually, Mal Donaghy comes out to take the ball off David Rocastle. Steve Foster had already come out and was on the floor, and basically Michael Thomas pinched the ball. Both centre-backs nowhere near the box. Smith went wide and then finished on the stretch, and that's 2-1, and we've got a mountain to climb.
Yeah, I mean, what I would stress, obviously, that it was very much a bit of a ding-dong between these two sides, but to stick my neck out, it's fair to say in that kind of 10, 11-minute period from the 70th minute to about the 81st minute or whatever it was, Arsenal really did dominate the game. And they get 2 goals, and both managers said afterwards, Jonathan, they thought that was it.
Yeah.
The way Arsenal were playing.
I mean, any final, if you score in the 71st and 74th minutes to go 2-1 up, it's very obvious the momentum shifted your way. But then the thing is, they don't sit back. They don't sort of defend it as you might think a George Graham side would. They keep going. And Dibble makes 3 really good saves in the 5 minutes after that. And then they get the penalty.
Well, I mean, they should score. I mean, those chances, Faye, you have...
Oh, the Martin Hayes close range. Oh, my life. He'll be kicking... Well, I mean, I'd love to chat to him and see whether he still has nightmares about that, because Alan Smith had actually beat Donaghy to the ball again, and Dibble had given a one-handed save onto the crossbar. It had then come back out to Martin Hayes at the far post. He's a yard out. The goal's gaping, and he just hits the post. You're like, what are you doing? Again, grateful, but awful miss.
You would think that would settle it if it was 3-1. So they have these chances. Dibble is playing like a man possessed. And then Arsenal get a penalty. Jonathan Rocastle is fouled. And
is he?
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. Rocastle, according to the referee, is fouled. And Winterburn steps. He actually does take it with his left.
Does he?
Yeah, he does take it with his left, having watched it back.
Okay.
But do you know the weirdness about this? Sorry to interrupt you, Marcus.
No, please.
So, Brian Moore mentions it in commentary. He says it was a very curious decision that Nigel Winterburn takes this penalty, because he'd only scored 1 goal for Arsenal before. Michael Thomas was their regular penalty taker, and Martin Hayes, who was already on the score sheet, was their top scorer of the season before, I think with like 24 goals or something like that, and 12 of them had come from the penalty spot. It's like, well, how have you come to this conclusion that Nigel Winterburn is taking this penalty? I don't understand.
Well, man,
again, grateful.
Yeah. He's extremely odd when you put it like that. I mean, he strikes it sort of fairly well, and Dibble makes an unbelievable save, but that is so weird.
He had time though. Andy Dibble had time. He guessed the right way, and he actually had time to get there because there wasn't enough pace on it.
So I think it's in. This is my excuse here coming up, but I think it's interesting. I thought he'd taken it right-footed because it has the power of a sort of open side foot shot to the keeper's left. But if he's hitting that with the inside of his left foot, he hasn't hit that hard at all.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. And if you watch Dibble, he's not on the stretch or anything. He's there. He's got it covered.
Yeah, it's a good sort of 4 or 5 feet inside the post. I mean, he does well to get down to it, and obviously he's able to push it.
Oh yeah, he's got the work
around
to do,
the post,
and he had to work out which way he was going to go. But at the same time, he wasn't, he wasn't. He didn't have to be lightning quick, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, almost what makes it a difficult save is it's one of those that can easily sort of go under the keeper's armpit, but it's not right in the corner. He's not a full stretch. He's got to sort of withdraw the arm slightly, so it's not a full stretch to push it away.
Yeah, I mean, just so many chances Arsenal of creating that in that little period. They even get a penalty, they miss that, and so I mean, so Faye, Luton must be thinking, well, we're still in this, lads. This is unbelievable, and they get a second win because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they ever felt they were out of it. I don't think that's the type of side that they were in the slightest. But they were certainly, up against the ropes for a good 10, 12 minutes in that second half. But literally, the momentum that penalty save gave them, like 2 minutes later, Gus Caesar again. Sorry, I'm so sorry, Gus, but he kind of tripped himself up in the box under pressure from Mark Stein. That allowed Kingsley Black to rob the ball off him on the left-hand side, fed in Brian Stein. One shot saved by Lukic, which was good smother, and then a second one turned in with a kind of stooping header by Danny Wilson at close range, and all of a sudden, game on. Which side would you back? To win it, and you'd back Luton. But again, the narrative was this game's going to extra time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as you say, it sort of swings because we chose there's a side that missed a penalty, and then Luton get the goal, and then it wouldn't be long after that they get the winner, of course, in the 90th minute.
Yeah, which is it's Mark Stein, isn't it? He's fouled by Tony Adams. Danny Wilson takes a free kick, gets headed out, and it comes to Ashley Grimes, who's come off the bench. So, and he takes it down the right, hooks the cross across, and then it's a great finish from Brian Stein, going across the near post, sort of volleying it back across goal. And it's one of those finishes where there's what's the word I'm looking for? There's sufficient lack of power on the shot that you think there's a chance that Lukic can get there, and then it's always just going away from him and goes in. And it's a great cross from Ashley Grimes and a great finish.
Well, when I spoke to my uncle, it's funny, there were two things that he mentioned about the game. It was the roar when that third goal went in. It was the touch from Steve Foster for the first goal, and it was the touch from Ashley Grimes for the third. Now, I didn't really remember when I'd watched this on VHS many years ago. I've still got it. It's actually my friend Gary's. I stole it from him about 20 years ago when we were at university and have never returned it. Don't think either of us have got a VHS player anymore anyway. But I didn't actually analyse that goal in the same way when I first watched that game. But the technique from Ashley Grimes is incredible because he's coming in from the right and he hits it with the outside of his left boot. It's just absolutely incredible. And then you add into that he managed to pick out Brian Stein running in on goal. Brilliant.
With Grimes' touch, I mean, again, you don't expect that from, was he Irish, was he? A centre-half plying his trade in England during the 80s, another a great assist, of course. And when that goal goes in, that's the game up, really. You see Harford raise his hands in the air and you think, surely that this amazing final has reached its climax there. And, scenes of absolute jubilation and huge celebrations that got a little bit too rowdy, if we remember the state of the trophy, Faye, later on, a couple of days later.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
But it was... Where's remarkable, the club sort of... Have you seen the club statement? It's very sheepish and sort of, we'll repair it. Yeah, they completely kind of accept responsibility and get it sorted out. There's no sort of attempt to disguise what had happened. Well,
this was so that you have the great celebrations at Wembley. They go on presumably for another couple of days, and then at a civic ceremony 2 days after the final, people were thinking, hang on, that trophy looks a little bit battered and bruised. And
I'm so surprised they don't just give replicas, do they? Because when you think Aubameyang dropped the FA Cup, didn't he, last year as well?
Well, the thing is that there isn't just one, certainly the FA Cup, there isn't just one of them.
No,
there's 4 of them
there's
now.
not. So why?
So presumably that's why. I don't know. And, I don't know if they still do this, but certainly in the good old days, when there was a chance, when 2 teams had a chance of winning the league on the final day of the season, they'd take a replica to one ground, the real one to the other, but they wouldn't say which one was which.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you had like the fake
I think
league
they
trophy.
still do that.
Do they? Excellent. But remind me, is it the proper League Cup, or is it did they have a different trophy for this being? Was it the Worthington's Cup by this stage?
No, it's the Littlewoods Cup. This one.
Littlewoods Cup.
Yeah.
Was it the three-handled one? I can't
I
remember.
don't know. God, you know what? I've no idea. You know,
So
my attention to detail isn't as good as yours, Jonathan.
Well, in '85, the Milk Cup, definitely they had a different. The Milk Marketing Board had produced a new trophy rather than the classic three-handled League Cup.
Mhm.
So
wasn't the Worthington Cup like in 1992, something like that? Wasn't that a bit later?
It might
Yeah,
have been,
yeah. But yeah, so some of the sponsors produce their own trophy. Some of them stuck with the old League Cup.
I never knew that.
I don't know which one they were using for this.
Me neither. Well, maybe when we returned it, they didn't want to use it again.
Yeah.
Well, I think it might have started out as a three-handled trophy, and ended up as a two-handled one. But it was Luton's trophy at the end of the day, Faye. They won it first silverware, and also to add to the fact that they were a good side in those days, they reached the final again the following year. They were beaten by Nottingham
Forest. Yeah.
But it
3-1.
shows you. Yeah, but it shows you, though, Hartford, it was a wonderful time, I'm sure, being a Luton Town fan.
Yeah, and I'm gutted I missed it live. Because just like you, Marcus, I got into football after the 1990 Italia 90. I collected all the coins. I had my Panini sticker album.
Yep.
And yeah, it was... It was a different time, and I'd love to just go back that 2 years earlier and have convinced my parents for some reason that it was a great idea to take a 9-year-old to a football ground in the 80s. Unfortunately, I don't think that would have washed.
That, though. But I sort of think, if I'd been born 10 years earlier, so I'd have been 6 in 73, or even 15 years earlier, so I'd have been 11. It would have ruined football because nothing would ever have been that good.
Yeah.
I'm glad that it's still ahead of me. I hope. Or maybe by the time you hear it, it's behind me. Who knows?
There's always next year, Jonathan. Always next year.
Yeah. Well, Faye, I'm sorry you didn't see the final, in the flesh or anything. I hope this podcast has somewhat made up for that.
Oh, do you know what? It's been so lovely. Like just sitting and watching that game again has been a real delight. As I say, it's been a good 15, 20 years, I reckon, since I last watched it. So yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity.
And it was a much, much better game. I mean, I remember it as being a good game, but I hadn't quite realised how good. So I'm very glad that it sort of refreshed my mind of how good that was.
Well, it's really
proper cup final.
Well, it made me appreciate what an amazing performance Andy Dibble put in as well, because I was unaware of that. I knew the score. I knew, obviously, Luton's first piece of silverware. Major silverware.
Andy Dibble sort of, he's sort of doomed to be remembered for Gary Crosby heading the ball off his hand. That was him, wasn't it, in the Forest Manchester City game?
I only remember him having a handful of performances for Rangers up in Scotland, where
he played 12 games on loan at Sunderland as well. So
there we are.
From Luton, he was on loan from Luton.
Right, yeah, because it was when Chris Turner fractured his skull. I think was when he came in. But I think he spent the majority. 85-6.
Yeah, I think he spent the majority of his career at Man City.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's him who, the incident where Gary Crosby sort of comes from, he's sort of holding the ball in his hand, ready to kick it clear. Oh, and Gary Crosby sort of runs around and nods off his hand and puts it in.
It could have been Dibble.
I think it is Dibble.
Don't ruin Dibble's moment.
But anyway,
greatest 90 minutes in his career, and you bring that up.
But he messed up though, didn't he? That's what we remember him for. We remember him for what we're now dubbing the Andy Dibble final.
He was the man of the match.
He was the man of the match.
Deservedly so.
Absolutely. Faye, it's been a pleasure talking to you about this game. Thank you very much for coming on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. For more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk, everybody. But until next week, it's goodbye from myself and Jonathan, and we'll see you then. Cheers.